There was a nurse who worked at a bustling city hospital. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was one that she had chosen because she genuinely wanted to help people. Her days were long, filled with endless shifts and countless patients in need of care. The hospital was always busy, the rooms never empty, and the halls echoed with the sounds of nurses' shoes tapping against the tile floors. She had become used to the chaos, but it didn't make it any easier. In fact, it often made her feel like she was just one person in a sea of voices, unseen and unnoticed. Despite her best efforts, she never seemed to get ahead. Every paycheck went straight to bills, groceries, and the occasional necessity. There was rarely any room left for things like saving or treating herself to something special. She had lived this way for as long as she could remember, and it was starting to wear on her. One evening, after a particularly exhausting 12-hour shift, she found herself sitting in her tiny apartment, staring at the empty fridge. There was barely enough food to make a meal. She had a few dollars left in her wallet, but not much more. The nurse sighed, the weight of her life's constant struggle pressing down on her shoulders. She had always been independent, but sometimes the loneliness of it all hit hard. Her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking her out of her thoughts. It was a message from a friend. "Hey, are you up for a date tonight? I know things have been rough, but maybe you could use a break. It's a blind date, I promise it's not too wild." She stared at the screen for a moment. A blind date? She wasn't sure if she even had the energy for it, let alone the time, but her friend's words stuck with her. Maybe you could use a break. It was true. She had been working so much that the idea of a night out, even a brief one, seemed like a chance to step away from the chaos of her life. She typed back a quick response. "Okay, I'm in, but I don't have much money, so I'll keep it simple." Her friend responded almost immediately, sending her the details for the cafe where they would meet. The nurse glanced at her wallet again. $5, that was it. She could use this last bit to buy a drink and at least try to have a pleasant evening, even if it meant cutting back on dinner. The cafe wasn't far from her apartment, just a short walk down the street. It was a cozy little place with warm lighting and soft music playing in the background. When she walked in, the smell of fresh coffee and pastries greeted her, comforting her for a moment. She had always liked cafes. There was something about the atmosphere that made her feel like she could slow down, even just for a little while. She scanned the room, looking for her date. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she was hoping for a pleasant conversation at the very least. As her eyes moved across the room, she spotted him sitting at a corner table, looking down at his phone. She walked over, took a deep breath, and greeted him with a friendly smile. "Hi, I'm here," she said. The man looked up, his expression warm but a bit surprised. "Oh, hi. I wasn't sure if you'd make it." She laughed nervously, sitting down across from him. "I wasn't sure either, but here I am." He smiled and gestured to the menu. "So what do you want to drink?" "My treat, of course." The nurse glanced at the menu, but her eyes kept drifting to her wallet. She didn't want to seem cheap, but she also didn't want to go overboard. She quickly scanned the prices and settled on a simple iced tea. "I'll have the iced tea, thanks." Her date nodded, and they made small talk as the barista prepared their drinks. It was awkward at first, but they soon found themselves talking about work. He asked what she did for a living, and she explained that she was a nurse. She told him about the long hours, the pressure, and the emotional toll it sometimes took. She tried to keep the conversation light, but there was something about the way he listened that made her feel like he genuinely cared about what she had to say. "Sounds like you're really dedicated," he said. "I have a lot of respect for people who do what you do." "It's not easy," she smiled, touched by his kind words. "Thanks, it's not always easy, but I love what I do. People need help, and I'm happy to be there for them, even if it's just in a small way." They both sipped their drinks, and the conversation turned to other topics. It was refreshing to talk about something other than work for once. They spoke about hobbies, travel, and their favorite books. The more they talked, the more she felt at ease with him. He seemed like a decent guy, someone who wasn't trying too hard to impress her but instead genuinely wanted to get to know her. The evening continued with more laughter, stories, and even a few shared moments of silence. It wasn't the most exciting date, but it was exactly what she needed. A calm, low-pressure evening to unwind. She hadn't expected much from the night, but she was enjoying herself. It felt nice to just be herself, without the weight of her responsibilities hanging over her for a little while. When the drinks were finished, she glanced at her phone. It was getting late, and she knew she had to work the next morning. She began to gather her things, reaching for her purse. But just as she was about to leave, her date surprised her by offering to cover the bill. "I can't let you pay for your own drink," he said, a teasing smile on his face. "It's only fair." The nurse felt a pang of embarrassment. "No, really, I'm okay. I just have a few dollars left in my wallet and I didn't want to make a big deal about it." But he insisted and she relented, feeling grateful but also a little uneasy. She hadn't expected him to be so kind. In her world, people rarely offered to pay for anything, especially when it wasn't a special occasion. She realized, however, that she had been so focused on her own struggles that she hadn't noticed how generous he had been all evening. As she stood to leave, she couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. It wasn't about the date or the drink or the fact that her date had been kind enough to cover the bill. It was the realization that maybe, just maybe, things didn't always have to be so difficult. Maybe there was still room for unexpected moments of kindness in her life. And as she walked back to her apartment, she felt a small spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time, a glimmer of possibility. The days that followed the blind date were typical for the nurse. Her schedule was packed with long shifts, and she often felt like she was running on empty. Even though she had enjoyed the date, it quickly became another forgotten moment in her daily routine. Her life revolved around patients, hospital protocols, and trying to find enough time for basic self-care. She had almost forgotten about the man she met until, out of nowhere, she received a message from him a few days later. It was a simple text asking how she was doing and if she wanted to meet again. The nurse hesitated for a moment. She wasn't sure if she was ready for another date, especially with her hectic schedule. But something about his message felt different. It wasn't pushy or overly forward. It was kind, just like the night they had spent together. "Hi, I hope you're doing well. I had a great time the other night. Would you like to meet again sometime?" She read the message twice, wondering if this was really happening. A second chance, she thought. It wasn't something she had expected after their first meeting. She had been so focused on just getting through the day-to-day struggles that she didn't think much about anything beyond survival. But now here was this unexpected opportunity for something more. After a few moments of contemplation, she replied, "I'd like that. I'm free on Thursday evening if that works for you." The reply came almost instantly, confirming the time and place, the same cafe where they had met last time. She couldn't help but smile. There was something comforting about meeting in a familiar spot. It felt like a gentle invitation to step out of the whirlwind of her life, even if just for a moment. The night of the second date arrived, and the nurse found herself walking to the cafe once again. This time, however, she wasn't as nervous as before. The first date had been full of awkward silences and hesitant conversation, but this time she felt more at ease. She knew a bit about him now, and she was looking forward to getting to know him even better. As she entered the cafe, she immediately saw him sitting at the same table by the window. He was engrossed in his phone, but as soon as she walked in, his eyes lifted and he smiled. She felt a small flutter in her chest at the sight of his warm expression. It was one of those smiles that made her feel like she mattered, even if just for a moment. "Hey, it's good to see you again," he greeted her, standing up to pull out the chair across from him. "Hi, it's good to see you too," she replied, feeling the familiar warmth spread through her as she sat down. He didn't waste any time with small talk. "How's work been?" he asked, his tone genuine. The nurse hesitated for just a second. Sometimes it was hard to explain her job to people outside of the medical world. It was difficult to capture the weight of it in just a few words. But with him it felt easier. She could tell he wasn't just asking out of politeness, he really wanted to know. "It's been challenging, honestly," she said after a pause. "It's a lot of late nights and long hours. But it's rewarding, too. I guess it's just the kind of work that doesn't give you much time to think about anything else." He nodded, understanding the toll it took on her. "That sounds tough. I can't imagine doing what you do. You're a lot stronger than I am." She smiled softly, touched by his words. "It's not always easy, but I'm used to it. You just push through." They both ordered their drinks and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. They talked about movies, music, and the things that made them happy. The nurse found herself laughing more than she had in a while. It was easy to talk to him, and for the first time in what felt like ages, she didn't feel like she had to keep a guard up. There was something about him that made her feel comfortable, like she could just be herself. As the evening wore on, they shared stories about their childhoods, their families, and their dreams. The nurse had always been someone who kept her dreams close to her chest. She had learned over the years not to get too hopeful about the future, but in the quiet comfort of their conversation, she found herself talking about things she hadn't thought about in years. She talked about the places she wanted to visit, the things she hoped to accomplish if she ever found the time or resources. She even spoke about her desire to eventually open a small clinic, something to help people who couldn't afford expensive treatments. "You have big dreams," he remarked, his voice warm. "I think it's amazing that you're not just going through the motions. You want to make a real difference." The nurse felt a surge of gratitude for his words. It was rare that anyone took the time to listen to her aspirations, let alone acknowledge them. She found herself opening up more, sharing thoughts and feelings she usually kept locked away. For some reason, she didn't feel judged by him. He wasn't trying to impress her or one-up her. He was simply there, listening and understanding. After a while, they finished their drinks and stood up to leave. As they walked out of the cafe, the night air felt crisp against her skin. The city was quiet now, the streets illuminated by soft streetlights. It wasn't the most exciting part of the evening, but there was something peaceful about it. Something that made her feel like she could slow down, even if just for a moment. They walked together in comfortable silence for a few blocks, before the nurse realized she had to head home. "Well, this was nice," she said, looking up at him with a smile. "I'm glad we got to meet up again," he smiled back. "Yeah, me too. I've really enjoyed getting to know you better." As they reached the corner where they would part ways, the nurse felt an unexpected tug of disappointment. It was silly, she thought. They had only known each other for a short time, and she hadn't even thought much about the future. But for the first time in a long time, she realized she didn't want this to be the end of their story. "Would you want to meet again sometime?" he asked, almost as if reading her mind. She smiled, feeling a flutter of excitement in her chest. "I'd like that." With that, they said their goodbyes, and the nurse walked home, her heart a little lighter than it had been in weeks. She wasn't sure what would come of this connection, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine the possibilities. The nurse couldn't remember the last time she had felt so at ease with someone. The weeks that followed their second meeting passed by quickly, filled with long hospital shifts and moments of rest in between. Despite the busyness of her life, she found herself thinking about him more and more. The simple gestures, the way he listened to her, and the kindness he showed without expectation made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. A connection. She wasn't used to feeling this way. After all, she had spent so much of her life focused on work, constantly juggling her responsibilities with little time for anything else. Relationships, friendships, and even the idea of taking a break from her routine had always felt like luxuries she couldn't afford. But with him, things felt different. It wasn't about grand gestures or fancy dates, it was just about being there in the moment, sharing a connection that didn't feel forced. They met again, this time at a small park near the cafe. It was their third meeting, and the nurse felt more comfortable than ever. The park was peaceful, with tall trees providing shade and a soft breeze rustling the leaves. They walked together, chatting casually about their days, but there was a deeper sense of understanding between them. She noticed how effortlessly the conversation flowed, how they didn't have to try hard to fill the silences. There was a rhythm to it, something natural. At one point, they sat on a bench, and she couldn't help but notice how different he seemed from the other men she had met in her life. Most people, especially in her line of work, were either too busy or too self-absorbed to genuinely care about others. But with him, it felt like he was actually interested in her well-being, in her thoughts, and in the small details of her life. "I'm really glad we're doing this," he said, his voice soft. "I feel like we've known each other much longer than we actually have." She smiled, looking at the ground for a moment before meeting his eyes. "Yeah, me too. It's nice to have someone to talk to." The words slipped out before she could stop them, and for a moment she felt vulnerable. But he didn't judge her. He just nodded, as if understanding the weight of her life without needing any more explanation. "I think we're both in need of some genuine connections," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Sometimes people forget what it feels like to just be real with someone, without pretending to be something they're not." The nurse nodded in agreement. It was a sentiment she knew all too well. She had spent years being the strong, reliable one at work, putting on a brave face for her colleagues and patients, but deep down, she was often lonely. It wasn't that she didn't have friends or family, but it was hard to connect with people who didn't understand the pressures she faced every day. She realized that with him, she could let her guard down without fear of being judged. They continued to talk for hours, enjoying each other's company in the peaceful park. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over everything, they walked back toward the cafe. The nurse felt a sense of contentment she hadn't known in years. For once, she wasn't thinking about her work or her financial struggles or how she was going to manage everything. She was simply enjoying the moment. The next week, something unexpected happened. She was in the middle of a shift when she received a call from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something told her to pick up. "Hello?" she answered, trying to balance the phone with a chart in her hands. "Hey, it's me," a familiar voice replied. It was him, the man she had been seeing. She smiled as she recognized his voice, even though she hadn't expected to hear from him during her work hours. "Hey, how's it going?" she asked, quickly moving into an empty break room to take the call. Good, he said, his tone a little different from usual. "Listen, I've been thinking about something. I know we've only known each other for a short time, but I feel like we've really connected. And I wanted to ask if you'd like to meet for dinner tonight. I know it's kind of last minute, but it's something I've been meaning to do." She paused, surprised by the invitation. Dinner? It wasn't that she didn't want to see him again, but her schedule was packed. She had just finished a long shift and another one was fast approaching. She glanced at the clock on the wall and felt a tug of guilt. It was tempting, but she knew she couldn't afford to miss any more time. "I'm really sorry, but I don't know if tonight will work," she said, feeling bad for turning him down. "I've got to work another shift later and I'm just really tired. But thank you for asking." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and she worried that she had disappointed him. But then he spoke again, his voice gentle. "I get it. I didn't mean to put you on the spot," he said. "I just wanted to let you know that I've been thinking about you. We don't have to go out tonight, but I'd really like to see you again soon. I enjoy spending time with you, and I think there's something special here." She felt her heart flutter at his words. It wasn't just the dinner invitation. It was the honesty and the vulnerability in his voice. She realized that he was being genuine, not just saying what he thought she wanted to hear. "I'd like that too," she said, feeling the warmth spread through her. "Let's figure something out soon." After hanging up, she leaned against the break room wall, feeling a rush of emotions. For the first time in a long time, someone was interested in her for who she was, not for her job or her responsibilities. It was refreshing, and it made her realize just how much she had been holding back in her life. The thought of letting someone in had always scared her, but now, with him, it felt natural. The following days passed in a blur of hospital shifts and late nights, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. She found herself looking forward to the moments she would spend with him, whether it was a simple walk in the park or a quiet dinner at the cafe. She didn't have much, but she felt like she was starting to understand what it meant to be happy again. It wasn't about wealth or status, it was about finding someone who made you feel valued, even in the most ordinary moments. Then came the day that would change everything.
She had finished her shift and was walking to her car when she received another unexpected call. "Hey."
"I need to tell you something." His voice was serious this time, which immediately caught her attention. "I didn't want to just spring this on you, but I think it's time you knew. The thing is, I'm not just a regular guy. I actually own the cafe where we've met a few times." The nurse's heart skipped a beat, her mind racing. She had wondered if there was something different about him, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. She had been going on dates with the CEO of the cafe chain all along, and she hadn't known. She didn't know what to say. The shock of his revelation left her speechless for a moment. It felt surreal. How could she not have known? "I wanted to be honest with you," he continued, his voice apologetic. "I didn't want you to think I was just some guy trying to impress you with my money. I really like you for who you are, not because of anything I have. I just wanted you to know." The nurse was quiet for a moment, absorbing everything he had just told her. Then finally she spoke. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling a little. "I never would have guessed, but I appreciate your honesty, and I think you're right. It doesn't change how I feel." The nurse didn't know what to think when she received the call. She had been walking through the quiet evening streets after another exhausting day at work. the cool air brushing against her skin as she made her way home. It was just a typical night, or so she thought. But as soon as she heard his voice on the phone, everything shifted. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice carrying an urgency she hadn't heard before. "It's important, and I think it's time you knew." Her heart skipped a beat. It was unexpected and a little unsettling. Was he okay? Was something wrong? She couldn't shake the feeling that this moment might change everything. "I'm listening," she replied, trying to keep her tone calm. There was a brief pause before he spoke again, his words carefully chosen. "I'm not just a regular guy. I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm trying to impress you, but I think you need to know the truth. I own the cafe where we've been meeting." The nurse froze in place. The world seemed to slow down, the sounds of the street fading as the reality of his words settled in. He was the owner of the cafe. She had been seeing the CEO of the cafe chain all along, and she hadn't even known. "I didn't want you to think I was hiding anything from you," he continued, his voice softer now. "I didn't want to be seen as just some guy with money trying to win you over with fancy dates or expensive gifts. I like you for who you are. I want you to know that. The fact that I own the cafe doesn't change anything about how I feel about you." She stood there, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. She hadn't expected this, but then again, nothing about their relationship had followed the script she had imagined. Their connection had never been about money or status. It had been about something far more genuine. But now, with this new revelation, she had to grapple with the reality of who he was. Could she still see him the same way? Could she continue to connect with him as she had before? She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing thoughts. I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "This is a lot to take in. I had no idea." He chuckled softly, and she could hear the slight tension in his voice fade. "I know. And I didn't want you to feel like I was keeping something from you. But I also didn't want to overwhelm you with it. I wanted you to get to know me first, without the distractions of my job or wealth. I hope that's okay." The nurse thought about it for a moment. It wasn't like she had been completely unaware that there was something different about him. He had always carried himself with an air of confidence, and there were moments when she wondered what he really did for a living. But she had never expected this, never imagined that he could be the CEO of a successful cafe chain. Still, despite the shock, something in her reassured her. The man she had spent time with, the person she had shared laughs and moments of vulnerability with, was the same person standing on the other end of the phone. The cafe owner was just a title. It didn't change who he was to her. "I'm glad you told me," she said finally. "And honestly, it doesn't change how I feel. I like you because of who you are, not because of what you do. I hope you know that." There was silence for a moment, and then he spoke again, his voice sounding a little relieved. "I'm really happy to hear that. I don't want to complicate things. I just wanted to be open with you." The nurse smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Thank you for being honest with me. I appreciate it." They talked for a little while longer, easing the tension that had built up between them. But even as the conversation came to a close, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were different now. They had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back. The next few days felt like a blur. The nurse continued her long shifts at the hospital, her mind occasionally drifting back to the conversation she had had with him. It was still hard to believe that he was the CEO of the cafe, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it didn't really matter. He had always been kind, thoughtful, and genuine. Those were the things that mattered the most to her. She saw him again the following weekend, and even though the reveal was still fresh in her mind, it didn't change the way she felt when they were together. They met at the cafe, and as soon as she walked through the door, she saw him sitting at their usual table by the window. He stood up when he saw her, his smile as warm as ever. The moment she sat down, it felt like everything was back to normal. There were no awkward silences, no uncertainty, just the two of them enjoying each other's company. "I hope you're not mad at me for not telling you sooner," he said after a few moments of small talk. "I just didn't want it to change anything between us." The nurse shook her head, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I'm not mad. I think it's kind of funny, actually. I've been sitting across from the CEO this whole time and didn't even know." He laughed, clearly relieved. "Well, I guess it's good that you didn't treat me any differently. That's what I wanted, to be treated like anyone else." They spent the evening talking about everything and nothing, about the little things that made them laugh, about their shared interests and about the future. The nurse found herself feeling more comfortable than ever, as if the revelation of his wealth had somehow strengthened their bond instead of weakening it. There was no pretense between them, no awkwardness, just a simple connection that felt real. As the weeks passed, their relationship deepened. They continued to spend time together, whether it was a quiet dinner or a walk through the park. Despite his success, the CEO never acted as though he was above her. He never flaunted his wealth or used his position to impress her. He simply treated her with kindness and respect, and that was all she really needed. One evening, they sat at the cafe again, sipping their drinks as they discussed their future plans. She had told him about her dream of opening a small clinic, a place where people could receive affordable health care, and he had listened intently, offering his support. "I think you're going to make it happen," he said one night as they talked about her plans. "You've got the passion and you've got the heart. That's what matters." Her heart swelled with gratitude. "I just need a little help getting there," he smiled. "Whatever you need, I'm here." It was in that moment that she realized just how much she had come to trust him. He wasn't just the CEO of a cafe chain. He was the man who had listened to her, supported her, and made her believe in herself again. Their connection continued to grow, and as time passed, they began to dream together. They made plans to travel, to explore new places, and to build a life together. It wasn't about the money or the status. It was about the bond they had formed, the shared experiences that had brought them closer. The nurse had spent so many years focused on survival, on getting through each day, that she had never stopped to think about what it would be like to truly live. But now, with him by her side, she was starting to see that there was more to life than just getting by. There was love, there was joy, and there was a future worth fighting for. It had been a few months since the nurse learned the truth about the man she had been seeing. The initial shock had worn off, and what remained was a sense of comfort and understanding between them. They had grown closer during that time, learning about each other's lives in a way that made everything else seem less important. The cafe owner, the successful CEO, and the nurse were just two people who found each other in a world that often felt too fast, too busy, and too complicated. She often found herself thinking about how much had changed. Just a few months ago, she had been focused entirely on surviving. Surviving the demanding job, surviving the pressure of constantly juggling work and life. Now she was looking forward to the future with him. It wasn't about having everything figured out or making grand plans. It was about enjoying the small moments, the quiet conversations, and the way they made each other feel. Their time together was always simple: a quiet dinner at his cafe, a walk around the city, or just sitting on a bench at the park talking about their dreams and fears. It was these moments that made her feel like she was finally living, not just going through the motions. She had always been independent, often feeling like she didn't need anyone else to be happy. But with him, it was different. He didn't complete her. No one could. But he added something to her life that made everything else feel brighter. One evening, after another long day at work, the nurse was on her way to meet him at their usual cafe. She had come to look forward to their meetings, but today felt different. It wasn't that she was expecting something to change, but the weight of the day had left her feeling drained. As she walked through the cafe door, the familiar warmth of the place wrapped around her, and she felt herself relax. There he was, sitting at the table by the window. He looked up as she entered, and his face lit up when he saw her. It was a small gesture, but it always made her heart skip a beat. She smiled as she walked over to him, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. "Hey," she said softly, taking a seat across from him. "Hey," he replied, his voice warm. "How was your day?" She sighed, feeling the exhaustion hit her all at once. "Long. It always feels like I'm barely keeping up, you know. But I'm here now, so that's something." He nodded in understanding. "I get it, but you're doing amazing. You always do." The nurse smiled faintly, feeling a bit of the tension melt away at his words. She didn't need him to tell her she was doing amazing. She knew he meant it. And sometimes just hearing it made everything seem a little more bearable. They ordered their drinks, and as they sat there, the conversation flowed easily. It wasn't anything profound, just the usual talk about their days and their plans for the future. But to her, it was everything. They didn't need extravagant dates or grand gestures to feel connected. They just needed each other's presence, and that was enough. As they talked, she couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder at how far they had come. It hadn't been easy at first. There had been doubts and uncertainties about who he was, about their future, and even about how she fit into his world. But now those doubts seemed so distant. She no longer cared about the labels or the expectations that others might place on them. She had found something real, something that mattered. After a while, they finished their drinks and he reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his. The gesture was simple, but it meant everything. He had always been a man of few words, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. And now, in this small, quiet cafe, his actions spoke louder than anything else. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We've been through a lot in such a short time, and I've realized that I don't want to take things for granted. I want to be with you, really be with you, not just in the moments we have now, but in the future, too." The nurse looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard him talk about the future before, but tonight it felt different. There was a sincerity in his voice that she couldn't ignore. "I feel the same way," she said softly, her fingers tightening around his. "I don't want to go through life alone anymore, and I don't want to just survive. I want to live. I want to build something with you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with a shared understanding that neither had to explain. They had both found something they hadn't even realized they were searching for. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice low. "I know we've only just started, but I can't imagine my life without you in it. And I want to make sure that's a part of my future. You're not just someone I'm seeing, you're someone I want to build a life with. I've never been so sure of anything." The nurse's heart swelled with emotion, her chest tight. She had never imagined that she could feel this way. She had spent so long trying to keep her heart safe, afraid of being hurt or let down. But with him, she felt like she was finally letting go of all the fears she had carried for so long. "I want that too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to be with you in every way possible." And just like that, everything clicked into place. The weight that had been on her shoulders for so long, the weight of uncertainty, of fear, of loneliness, lifted. They weren't perfect and they didn't have all the answers, but they had each other. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. In the weeks that followed, their relationship continued to deepen. They spent more time together, exploring new places, laughing over silly things, and supporting each other through the challenges they faced. The nurse's life had changed in ways she hadn't expected. She no longer felt the need to hide her emotions or pretend that everything was okay when it wasn't. She could be vulnerable with him, and he accepted her for who she was. He, too, had changed. The man who had once been focused on his business and success was now someone who cared deeply about her well-being, someone who wanted to build a future not just for himself, but for them both. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of his home, the nurse looked over at him, a smile spreading across her face. She had always been a dreamer, but now she felt like her dreams were within reach. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think that I couldn't have it all, that I had to choose between my career, my dreams, and my happiness, but now I'm starting to see that maybe it's possible to have both." He looked at her, his eyes filled with affection. "You can have everything you want as long as you don't give up on it." She laughed, a sound that felt light and free. "I won't, not anymore." And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. She didn't need to keep fighting to survive anymore. She could finally start living. Their love story wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. It was built on trust, mutual respect, and the understanding that life wasn't always easy. But with each other, they knew they could face anything. As the years went by, they built a life together, one filled with laughter, love, and the kind of joy that comes from knowing you have someone who truly understands you. The nurse's dream of opening a clinic slowly began to take shape, with the support of the man she loved. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about them, and the future they were creating together. And as they stood side by side, facing whatever challenges came their way, they knew that no matter what, they had already found something precious, something that would last a lifetime. The nurse never imagined that her life would change in the way it had. Just a year ago, she was struggling to keep up with the pressures of her demanding job, dealing with long shifts and little time for herself. Now she found herself standing at the edge of something new, something that felt real and promising. Her relationship with him, the cafe owner, had blossomed into something beautiful. What had started as a simple connection between two strangers had grown into a bond that neither of them had expected. They had been through a lot together, learning about each other's fears, hopes, and dreams. And through it all, they had remained side by side, supporting each other in ways neither of them had thought possible. The nurse had come a long way from the days when she had focused solely on surviving. She had always been someone who put everyone else's needs before her own. But with him, she had started to believe in herself again, to understand that she deserved happiness too. They weren't perfect and their relationship wasn't without challenges, but together, they had built something strong. One evening, after a long day at work, she sat down with him at their favorite cafe. It was a quiet evening with only a few people in the cafe, and the soft hum of the music in the background created a peaceful atmosphere. They had become regulars here, and the staff knew them by name. The cafe had become more than just a place to meet. It had become a symbol of their relationship, a reminder of how far they had come. As they sat across from each other, the nurse couldn't help but notice how much had changed. The man who had once seemed so distant, so focused on his business, was now the person she turned to for comfort, for support. He had shown her a different side of life, one where success wasn't measured by wealth or status, but by the connections you made with the people who truly mattered. "I've been thinking," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, but there was a seriousness in it that caught her attention. "I know we've talked about the future before, but I want to make sure we're on the same page. I want to build something with you. Not just a relationship, but a life, together." The nurse looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had always dreamed of having someone to share her life with, but she had never imagined that it could be like this. It wasn't just about love. It was about building something real, something lasting. "I want that too," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I want to build a future with you, to do all the things we've talked about and more." He smiled, a warmth in his eyes that made her feel like she was home. "I've been thinking about it for a while, and I know we're ready. I know it's not going to be easy, but I believe in us. I believe in what we have." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their words hanging in the air. It wasn't just about their love for each other. It was about everything they wanted to create together. They both knew that life would have its challenges, but they were ready to face them. They had already proven that they could overcome obstacles together, and now, they were ready to take the next step. A few weeks later, things started to fall into place. The nurse's dream of opening a small clinic, a place where people could receive affordable health care, was becoming a reality. It had always been something she had hoped for, but she had never known how to make it happen. Now, with his support, it felt like it was within reach. They spent weekends meeting with architects and discussing the plans for the clinic. It wasn't going to be easy, but the nurse felt a sense of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. She had always put others before herself, but now she was focusing on something that was her own. The clinic wasn't just a career goal. It was a way for her to make a real difference in people's lives, something that felt more fulfilling than anything else she had done. He was by her side every step of the way, offering advice, making calls, and helping her navigate the challenges of starting a new business. But it wasn't just about the clinic. It was about their shared vision for the future. They wanted to create a life together, and they were both willing to do the hard work to make it happen. As the months went by, the clinic began to take shape. The building was coming together, and the nurse could hardly believe that this dream of hers was finally becoming a reality. She had always been focused on survival, but now she was focused on building something that would have a lasting impact on the community. And through it all, their relationship continued to grow. The challenges they faced, both professionally and personally, only brought them closer. They learned to lean on each other, to trust each other, and to build a life that was rooted in love, respect, and shared goals. One evening, as they stood in front of the clinic, looking at the progress they had made, the nurse felt a sense of pride. It was no longer just a dream, it was something tangible, something real. She turned to him, a smile spreading across her face. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. He smiled back, pulling her into a hug. We're doing it together. It was in that moment that the nurse realized just how far she had come. A year ago, she had never imagined that her life could look like this. She had been so focused on getting through each day that she hadn't allowed herself to dream. But now, with him by her side, she had learned to believe in herself again, to believe in the future they were building together. The nurse had always thought that success was about working hard, putting in the hours and making sacrifices. But now she understood that true success was about building a life with the people who mattered most. It was about creating something meaningful, something that would last long after the work was done. And as she stood there, holding his hand and looking at the clinic they had worked so hard to create, she knew that this was just the beginning. The journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but she was ready. She had everything she needed: his love, her dreams, and the belief that together they could overcome anything. The nurse had once believed that happiness was something she had to work for, something that would come once she had achieved her goals. But now she realized that happiness wasn't something to chase. It was something that happened when you were living fully in the present, when you were sharing your life with the people who truly cared about you. She no longer saw the future as a distant goal to be reached. Instead, she saw it as a series of moments, small, beautiful moments that added up to something meaningful. And with him by her side, she knew that every moment was a chance to build something even more incredible than she had ever imagined. Together, they had already created something special, a love that was built on trust, honesty, and the belief that they could face anything together. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that the best was yet to come.